Hello and welcome to the Biology 6 lecture on chemistry. The purpose of this lecture is to introduce some of the most basic concepts of the science of chemistry to you, concepts like atoms and molecules and covalent bonds, just to name a few. Now, this is a physiology course, so why do you have to have a lecture in chemistry? Well, it relates to something that we talked about in the previous lecture called the hierarchy of biological complexity. And in that previous lecture, I showed you this slide. And the basic idea here is this, that your body is made out of things called organ systems. Like this shows your digestive organ system, your stomach and intestines and liver and pancreas, for example. But there are about 11 other organ systems that your body is also made out of. Like you have a skeletal organ system and a muscular organ system and a nervous organ system. So in a sense, your body is built out of your 12 organ systems, but each organ system is built out of organs. You know, your organ system, your digestive organ system is built out of your stomach and small intestine and large intestine and pancreas and liver and gallbladder. So organs are the building blocks of organ systems, but organs themselves are the building blocks of tissues. Like if you look closely at this organ, you can see it's made out of several layers of tissues. And the building blocks of tissues are cells. You know, a tissue is a group of cells of the same type all together. And it's not labeled in this figure, but the building blocks of cells are cell organelles. Cell organelles are the parts of cells, like the nucleus is an organelle, and the membrane is an organelle of cells. And the cell organelles are built out of things called molecules, like you see here. Molecules are atoms that have become joined together. And molecules are made out of atoms, so atoms are the building blocks of molecules. Anyway, this figure that you see and everything that I just talked about is called the hierarchy of biological structures, or hierarchy of biological complexity. And so, yes, we're going to be talking about the physiology of the organ systems of the body this semester. But to understand the organ systems, you have to understand the organs, and to understand the organs, you have to understand the tissues, and to understand those, you have to understand cells, and to understand those, you have to understand organelles, and to understand organelles, you have to understand molecules and atoms. And molecules and atoms are within the realm of the science of chemistry, and so that's why we're having this introductory lecture on the science of chemistry. Okay, so the most basic chemistry concept is atoms. And essentially, if I had to put them in just a few words, atoms are the building blocks of everything in the world around us. And let me now introduce that, give that concept again in a little bit better way. So when you were a kid, maybe you played with Legos. And if you did play with Legos, you know, you built some non-living things out of them. It looks like these kids built a house and a train out of Legos. But maybe you built living things out of your Legos also. Maybe you built Lego people or Lego dogs or something like that. Well, in your Lego world, everything that you built, whether it was a living thing or a non-living thing, for its smallest parts, they were the Lego blocks. You know, like everything that you built, its smallest bits were Lego blocks. So what I'm saying is the real world, actual living things and actual non-living things, you know, like you are a living thing and your dog is a living thing, obviously, and the computer that you're standing in front of right now is a non-living thing. So everything in the real world is also made out of small little building block particles. Obviously, they're not plastic Lego blocks. What are they? Well, they are atoms. So everything in the real world, living or non-living, is made out of these tiny little building block particles called atoms. Sometimes atoms are referred to as elements, but usually we just call them atoms. So if you look at the lecture outline for this lecture on chemistry, it defines atoms as the smallest particles of ordinary matter. Okay, so this is kind of a drawing of an atom. As you can see, atoms aren't little block-shaped things the way Legos are. They are round particles like you see here. Now you may wonder, well, if everything around me is actually built out of these atoms, why doesn't everything look like it's made out of these little ball-shaped particles? And the answer is atoms are just too tiny to see with the naked eye. In fact, even with a really good microscope, atoms are still too small to see. So atoms are round and super, super tiny, but nevertheless, they are the building block of everything you see. They are the smallest particles of ordinary matter. Now, here's another thing about atoms. In addition to atoms being tiny and round, there are many different types of atoms. There are iron atoms, there are carbon atoms, there are chlorine atoms, there are oxygen atoms, there are hydrogen atoms, just to name a few. How many types of atoms are there? The answer is just over 100 types of atoms. And usually all the 100 plus types of atoms are listed in a type of table called the periodic table of elements. And I'm sure you've seen the periodic table of elements hanging in science classrooms. And so yeah, it's just basically a list of the 100 plus types of atoms that exist in the universe. Now, if you've ever studied the periodic table, you'll see that for each of the elements, each of the types of atoms listed on the periodic table, each atom has what it's called its atomic symbol. And here they're showing a symbol like this one right here. So what the atomic symbol is, it's kind of a short way of writing the name of the atom. Like if you don't want to write out carbon when you're talking about a carbon atom, you could write its atomic symbol, which is just lowercase c. And as a matter of fact, I think the next slide shows the atomic symbols for 4 atoms. Here we go. The atomic symbol for a carbon atom is a C, and the atomic symbol for a hydrogen atom is an H, and the atomic symbol for an oxygen atom is O, and N is the atomic symbol for a nitrogen atom. Well, here's some good news and bad news. The bad news is that I want you to memorize some atomic symbols. And the good news is that you do not have to memorize all 100 plus atomic symbols. In your lecture handout for this chemistry lecture, on the first page, I have listed 12 atoms and their atomic symbols. And you can see them listed on your outline for this lecture, but they are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, iron, and magnesium. And yes, and the lecture outline lists the atomic symbols for all of those. And so I want you to memorize those. And I may ask you questions about them on quizzes or midterms. I might say, tell me the atomic symbol for a carbon atom. So I want you to be able to say, Mr. Eden's C is the atomic symbol for a carbon atom. Or I might ask it backwards. I might say, H is the atomic symbol for what atom? And I want you to say, Mr. Eden's H is the atomic symbol for a hydrogen atom. So not always, but oftentimes the atomic symbol is simply the first name, the first letter of the atom's name. Like you can see it here. Oxygen, the first letter is O, and so that's what they used for the atomic symbol for oxygen. Sometimes it's the first 2 letters of the atom's name. You can't see it here on this slide, but if you look at your lecture outline, you will see for calcium atoms, they use Ca as the atomic symbol. And for magnesium atoms, they use Mg as the atomic symbol. Now, there's sort of a rule that they follow. If the atomic symbol is just a single letter, like you see here on this slide, they use a capital letter. If the atomic symbol is 2 letters, like Ca is the atomic symbol for calcium, only the first letter is capitalized and the second letter is lowercase. So again, if you look at the lecture outline for this lecture and you look at the atomic symbol for calcium, it's capital C, lowercase a is the atomic symbol for calcium. Now, if you look at the lecture outlines, outline for this lecture, some of them don't seem to match their name. Like for iron atoms, the atomic symbol is Fe, and for sodium atoms, the atomic symbol is Na. And so you might wonder, well, where do they get those letters for the atomic symbol? Usually, in those 2 cases, it's from the Latin name for the atom. Anyway, so please memorize the 12 atoms and 12 atomic symbols that you find on the lecture outline for this lecture. Oh, and why did I pick those 12 atoms for you to memorize? Those are the major atoms that living things are built out of. Obviously, physiology is a biology course, so we're studying living things. And those 12 atoms that I have listed there make up almost all the atoms that you find inside living things. And in particular, the first 4 on that list, which are shown here, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, make up the vast majority of the atoms found in living things. About 96% of the atoms in your body are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So we're really going to be studying a lot of the chemistry of just those four atoms. Now, earlier I told you to think of the atoms as like Mother Nature's Lego blocks. Well, if you think about Lego blocks, they're designed to stick together. You know, they want to naturally will click together with each other. Well, atoms are the same way. Atoms have a natural tendency to want to join together, to join on to each other. And so, as an example, if you can imagine if you took an oxygen atom and a couple of hydrogen atoms and got them anywhere near each other, yeah, they would have this natural tendency to want to come together and click together with each other, something like this. Well, when that happens, when atoms come together and bond onto each other, the new particle that you formed from the atoms joining together is called a molecule. A molecule is a particle that is made out of atoms joined together. Now you may say, well, how many atoms in a molecule? Well, that depends on which which molecule you're talking about. It could be as small as two. Just if it's just two atoms that come together and bond together, then that's a two-atom molecule. This molecule, which I think you might recognize as a water molecule, is made out of three atoms together, one oxygen and two hydrogens. Other molecules might be larger. Other molecules might be made out of 20 atoms joined together. Some molecules are so huge that they are millions of atoms joined together. So it could be any number, two or higher. It's just more than one atom joining together qualifies as a molecule. Oh, and incidentally, sometimes people call molecules compounds. It means the same thing, but I usually refer to them as molecules. Okay, so a molecule is a particle made out of atoms joined together. Now, notice in this drawing that you're seeing here, I'm showing these lines connecting the atoms to each other in the molecule. Those are called covalent bonds. And so think of them as the glue that holds the atoms together in the molecule. Now, the covalent bonds are not actually made of glue. They're actually made out of particles called electrons, which you can think of as basically electrical force. So let's not worry too much what the covalent bonds are actually made out of, but just think of them as like the glue that holds the atoms together in molecules. Okay, now in this drawing of the molecule here, I'm showing the atoms as their actual shapes, little ball shapes. But in most drawings of molecules that you'll see in textbooks, they don't show the atoms as little ball shapes, they just write their atomic symbols. So this would be a more typical way that a molecule will be shown, just the atomic symbols with the covalent bonds between them. Now, incidentally, when a molecule is drawn out like you see here, where they show the atoms and the covalent bonds between them, that's called a molecular structure. So a molecular structure is essentially a drawing of a molecule that shows you all the atoms and all the covalent bonds of the molecule. And this is just a water molecule. Let me show you some other molecular structures. So over here, you see an oxygen molecule. It's made out of two oxygens that have a covalent bond linking them together. Incidentally, that's what the oxygen is that we breathe in the air is. The oxygen in the air that we breathe is not single oxygen atoms. It's actually oxygen molecules made out of two oxygen atoms bonded together, covalently bonded together. And here is the molecular structure of an ammonia molecule. Ammonia, for example, occurs in our urine. It's one of the waste products that exits the body in our urine. As you can see, it's a molecule made out of four atoms, one nitrogen atom and three hydrogen atoms. Here's a water molecule. We talked about that already. And here's a molecule of a gas called carbon dioxide. Each carbon dioxide molecule is made out of one carbon and two oxygen atoms, all bonded together. Carbon dioxide, that's a gas made by our body. It's when we breathe outward, when we expire air out of our lungs, that air that we expire has carbon dioxide gas from our body. Oh, one interesting thing about carbon dioxide if you notice, there are what are called double covalent bonds, or just double bonds for short, between each oxygen and the carbon. That's perfectly okay to have more than one bond between the atoms of a molecule. It just means that they are more strongly glued together than atoms that are just held together by a single bond. Yes, those are called double bonds. Anyway, here these are some example molecular structures of four molecules, and all these are relatively small molecules, right? I mean, the largest one is just made out of four atoms joined together. But as I said a few minutes ago, many molecules are much larger, have many more than four atoms joined together. Some molecules have hundreds of thousands or even millions of atoms joined together. Okay, so sometimes when chemists or biologists want to talk about molecules, show molecules to you, they show them like this. They draw out the molecular structure of the molecule. But there's also kind of a shorthand way of representing molecules, of showing you molecules. And this shorthand way is called the molecular formula. And maybe I'll just show you the molecular formulas of these four molecules. And so, yeah, below each molecule, you see its molecular formula. So again, a molecular formula is just another way of representing a molecule. So this, the O2 represents that, and here the NH3, that represents an ammonia molecule, just like this does, and the molecular formula H2O represents the water molecule you see up here. Good, yeah, so this molecular formula is just a different way of representing the molecule, other than it's different from its molecular structure drawing. So how do you make a molecular formula? Well, first of all, notice that it's made out of the atomic symbols. Like for ammonia, it contains nitrogen atoms, nitrogen atoms and hydrogen atoms, but the atomic symbols are all jammed together, right? The N is right next to the H. And likewise, in a water molecule here, it's made out of oxygen and hydrogen atoms, and so you put those atomic symbols, the H in this case and the O, right next to each other with very little, if any, space between them. So that's part of how you draw a molecular formula. You take the atomic symbols of all the atoms in the molecule and kind of jam those atomic symbols right next to each other. But there's another little bit to it. If there's more than one of an atom in a type, if there's more than one of a type of atom in a molecule, you have to put a little subscript number next to that atom's atomic symbol to say how many there are. So, for instance, in this oxygen molecule, there are two oxygen atoms, and so you have to put a little subscript 2 after the oxygen molecular formula to tell people, hey, there's two of these oxygen molecules, oxygen atoms in this molecule. And so, yeah, when you see a little subscript number, note that it relates to the atomic symbol, which is just upward and to the left of it. The 2 relates to that oxygen, saying there's two oxygen atoms in this molecule. And let's go over here to this ammonia one right here. Each ammonia molecule has 3 hydrogen atoms, and so after the atomic symbol H, you have to put a little 3 to tell people, hey, this molecule has 3 hydrogen atoms in it. Now notice if there's only one atom, you do not put a little 1. It's just sort of understood there's a 1 there if there's only one of the atom, like there's only one nitrogen atom here, and so you just don't put any number down there. It's just sort of understood if there's no number that it means there's just one of that atom. Good, and here's water. It's molecular formula H2O, like you see there, and here's carbon dioxide. It's made out of 1 carbon and 2 oxygens, so you say CO2 with a little subscript 2 after the O to say that there are 2 oxygen atoms in the carbon dioxide molecule. Okay, well, let me give you a little drill here. Here's your turn to see if you've got the concept of molecular formulas. So here is a molecule, and I want you to write out what you think is the molecular formula for it. So I'll give you just a few seconds. Maybe stop the video if you want to and see and try to write out the molecular formula for this molecule. All right, well, let me give you the answer or an answer. Here it is. The molecular formula for this molecule is H2CO3 because the molecule contains 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 carbon atom, and 3 oxygen atoms. Now, if you tried to answer this yourself, you might have gotten these in a different order. Maybe you wrote CH2O3, or maybe you wrote O3H2C, or maybe you wrote CO3H2. You might have put them in a different order. In this class, that's fine. In this class, you'll get full points no matter what order you put the atomic symbols of the molecule in. In an actual chemistry class, they do teach you some rules for putting the atomic symbols in the proper order in the molecular formula. But I was a chemistry major for a while, and I couldn't even follow all those rules. And so, like I say, in this class, let's not worry about what order you put them in. As long as you get the right atomic symbols with the right subscript numbers, you'll get full credit in this class. Let's do another drill here. So here is a molecule, and again, I want you to write out the molecular formula. Feel free to stop the video if you want to take a moment or two to try it on your own. But here is the answer. Its molecular formula is C3H8O3 because it has 3 carbon atoms, 3 oxygen atoms, and 8 hydrogen atoms. And again, if you wrote those in the different order, if you wrote, let's say, H8C3O3 or O3C3H8, that's fine. You'd get full credit in this course. Okay, so hopefully I think you have a good handle on how to write out molecular formulas for a given molecular structure of a molecule. Sometimes we need to talk about more than one of a given molecule. For instance, in this figure, you see 3 oxygen atoms. Well, here's how you include, if there's more than one of a molecule in its molecular formula, you just put a big digit out front of the molecular formula to say how many of that molecule you're talking about. So if you see something like this, big 3, and then a molecular formula, H2O, that means you're talking about 3 H2O molecules. So don't mix up the big digit in front with the little subscript digits within the molecular formula. Those little subscript numbers, well, they're kind of lower down and they're smaller, and they always come after an atomic symbol. If you see a big digit in front, then that's not a subscript number. That's telling you how many of the molecules that follow that digit there are. This means 3 H2O molecules. Okay, now again, it's your time to give that a try. Let's say we want to talk about these molecules. Please write the molecular formula that you would use to represent these molecules that you see here. All right, and here's the answer. You would write out 4NH3, big 4, and then NH3 with a little subscript 3 after the H, because each molecule is NH3, but you're talking about 4 of those molecules, so you put a big 4 in front of the molecular formula, the NH3. Okay, let's move on to the next concept in this lecture. Atoms and molecules can become electrically charged. And you may wonder, well, how do they get electrically charged? Did somebody stick them in a wall socket or something like that? No, there are natural processes that can give atoms or molecules electrical charges. And so let me just show you here. When atoms or molecules become electrically charged, we now call them ions. So everything you see here are ions. And sometimes ions are also referred to as electrolytes or salts, but usually we call them ions. So anytime an atom or a molecule is electrically charged, we call it an ion, and the term ion means an atom or molecule that has become electrically charged. Now, when an atom or a molecule is an ion, you have to add a charge symbol as a superscript to the upper right-hand corner of its atomic symbol or molecular formula. And so the charge symbol is always either a negative or a plus, depending on whether it has positive electrical charge or negative electrical charge. You see, there is positive electricity and negative electricity. If you think about your car battery, it has a red terminal and a black terminal because one is positive electrical charge and one is negative electrical charge. So it's the same thing with ions. They can either be positive electrical charges or negative electrical charges. And yeah, so if it's a positive electrical charged ion, you put a positive sign as a superscript next to the atomic or symbol or molecular formula, and if it's a negative ion, you put a negative symbol there. Now, incidentally, the general term for any positively charged ion is a cation, and the general term for any negatively charged ion is an anion. And there's some couple of tricks for remembering those terms. The word cation has a T in the middle, right? Cation, and a T sort of looks like a plus sign, right? So that's how you can remember that the word cation means the positively charged ions. And the word anion, the first two letters are An. Think of that as meaning a negative. So anion, you can think of as means a negative ion. In addition to the minus or plus sign that you put as the superscript for an ion, if it has more than one unit of electrical charge, you have to put a little digit to say what amount of electrical charge it has. So calcium ions have 2 units of electrical charge because there's a 2 there. If it only has 1 unit of electrical charge, you don't put the 1. You just put either a plus sign if it has 1 unit of positive charge, or just a negative sign if it has 1 unit of negative charge. So chloride ion has 1 unit of negative electrical charge. Sodium ions, potassium ions, and hydrogen ions all have 1 unit of positive electrical charge, but calcium ions have 2 units of positive electrical charge. And you may say, well, what do you mean units of charge? Is that like volts or amps or something? Well, it's not volts and it's not amps. It's kind of its own unit of electrical charge. Okay, so in your lecture outline for this chemistry lecture, I listed 5 common atomic ions that are found in the body. And do I have them all here? I guess maybe I do, yeah. And so I want you to memorize these 5 atomic ions that I'm showing here. So, on a test, I may say, what is the common ion of sodium in the body? I want you to say, Mr. Edens, it's sodium, +1. Or I might say, what's the common ion of calcium in the body? And I want you to say, Mr. Edens, it's calcium +2. So memorize these 5 atomic ions, please. And what do we call them? Well, they usually just give the name of the atom and they say ion. So like they would say chloride ion, or sodium ion, or potassium ion, or hydrogen ion, or calcium ion. Oops, actually, now that I look at it, in the lecture outline, I also included magnesium ions, which are their symbol is Mg2+. So memorize that one also. And again, I kind of blew it in the web handout in the lecture outline. I did not put H+ ions, but I do also want you to memorize H+ ion. Okay, yeah, so what do we call these? Normally, you just call them by the name of the atom and you say ion. So they would say hydrogen ion, potassium ion, sodium ion, chloride ion, calcium ion. Sometimes I actually say the number, like sometimes I might say chloride ion -1, sodium ion +1, potassium ion +1, calcium ion +2, that sort of thing. But usually they just say ion, and they expect you to have memorized the charges on these ions. So if they just say hydrogen ion, they expect you to know that it's hydrogen with +1 charge. Yeah, so please memorize these ones you see here, and also magnesium ions, which are Mg+2. Okay, so what you're seeing here are atomic ions. They are just atoms that have become ions. There are also molecular ions. Molecular ions are where a whole molecule has become an ion. The whole molecule has picked up an electrical charge. And there are several of these molecular ions that are found in the body. Oh, sorry, I was going to mention one thing, and now I've forgot to mention it. These ions of the body are very important to the proper functioning of the body. Just as an example, sodium ions and potassium ions, those two are particularly important for the proper functioning of your nervous system. If those two ions, sodium ions, potassium ions, are not at their proper homeostatic ranges in the body, your nervous system can start to malfunction, and that can cause some very serious problems, perhaps even death. And calcium ions, those are important in the body for building bones, but also for proper muscle contraction, depends on calcium ions. So anyway, the reason why I'm having you memorize the ions that I am having you memorize is because those are the ions that are particularly important to the proper functioning of the body. Anyway, so what I was about to say is that it's not just atoms that can become ions, molecules can become ions also. And here we go. So these are examples of some common and very important molecular ions that you find in the body. For instance, in the body, you can find a molecule made out of one oxygen atom and one hydrogen atom, but that molecule as a whole has picked up a -1 ionic charge, and you call that a hydroxide ion. And here's another common ion in the body. It's a molecule made out of one phosphorus atom and four oxygen atoms, and the molecule as a whole has a -3 ionic charge, and we call that phosphate ion. And lastly, here's another molecular ion that's common in the body. It's a molecule made out of one hydrogen, one carbon, and three oxygen atoms. It carries a -1 ionic charge, and we call that ion bicarbonate ion. So please memorize these three ions, these three molecular ions, and their molecular formulas along with their proper ionic charges. I want you to have these memorized also. Now, for the phosphate ion there, in many biology books that I read, they sometimes symbolize it as a circle P, a P with a little circle around it. And I don't think chemists do that, but biologists sometimes write it like that in figures in biology books. So you should probably know that in this class and in your physiology textbook, if you see circle P like that, it means a phosphate ion. Okay, so you know that the term molecule means when atoms have become covalently bonded together. So, for instance, here's a nitrogen molecule, an N2 molecule. It's made out of two nitrogens covalently bonded to each other. And here's an oxygen molecule, an O2 molecule made out of two oxygen atoms covalently bonded together. Okay, so you know molecules and the covalent bonds that link the atoms together into molecules. Well, as it turns out, molecules are always in motion. They're always moving around, and in fact, the higher the temperature, the faster molecules move. In a sense, that's what temperature is. It's the speed of the molecule, the speed that the molecules are moving. Well, those molecules, because they're always moving, they can collide with each other. And just like when two cars collide with each other in a car crash, when molecules collide with each other, things can break off, right? Like in a real car crash, fenders and wheels and glass and stuff, car parts come shooting off. The same thing when molecules collide together. The covalent bonds that hold the atoms together in the molecules, those covalent bonds can temporarily break. And so the atoms are very temporarily, briefly freed from each other in the molecule. Well, those atoms will very quickly form new covalent bonds, but not necessarily in the same arrangements as in the original molecules before the collision. And so what that means is the molecules can end up changed because when they collide with each other and the covalent bonds become temporarily broken, the new covalent bonds may be between atoms, different arrangements of the atoms that are different from what you had in the original molecules. And so that's what I'm going to show you here when I click the button. You'll see that these molecules get changed because they collide, the old covalent bonds break, and new covalent bonds form in a different pattern than in the original molecules. And here's the animated cartoon. They collide with each other, old bonds break, new bonds formed. And so notice the number of atoms didn't change. You still have two nitrogen atoms and two oxygen atoms present, but they've now arranged themselves into some different molecules. We did not have any N2 molecules. I'm sorry, we did not have any NO molecules before the collision occurred. But now we do have some NO molecules, right? Okay, so what you just saw here is officially called a chemical reaction. A chemical reaction is where molecules get changed. And what that means is the molecules might lose some atoms, the molecules might gain some atoms. Both might happen. They might lose some atoms and gain some atoms. But anytime molecules change, molecules get changed, that's what we call a chemical reaction. Now, we need to be able to write out a chemical reaction because what we're going to be talking about for a lot of this semester are the chemical reactions that go on in the body. And so, yeah, we need to be able to write those out to symbolize them. And so I'm going to show you that same chemical reaction that I showed you just a second ago, but we're going to learn how to write it out. Okay, so the beginning molecules, the molecules that go into the chemical reaction. I think in the lecture handout I called these the old molecules, but I should have said the beginning molecules, the molecules that start the chemical reaction. You write out their molecular formulas with a plus sign between them, and you put them on the left side. So notice on the left side here, I wrote N2 plus O2. So yeah, you write the molecular formulas of all the molecules that are going into the reaction with a plus sign between them. And you call those molecules the reactants. The reactants are the molecules they're going into the chemical reaction, the starting molecule, so to speak. Okay, so how would you pronounce this? I would say N2 plus O2. Some people say reacts with. So some people would say N2 reacts with O2. Okay. Anyway, that's how you write out the reactants. You write, well, on the left side, their molecular formulas with a plus sign between them. And then when they actually collide with each other and the old covalent bonds break and the new covalent bonds are forming, you symbolize that with an arrow pointed to the right, like you see there. And I pronounce that as turns into. So I would say N2 plus O2 turn into. All right, so that's the arrow right in the middle of the chemical reaction that you're writing out. And then lastly, to the right of the arrow, you write the molecular formula or formulas for the product molecules. The product molecules are the changed molecules, the molecules that are coming out of the chemical reaction. So maybe this is a good spot to review. How would you write the molecular formula for those two product molecules? And here's the answer, 2NO. Now, some of you might have said NO plus NO, but remember, if you're talking about two of the exact same molecule, you just write out one molecular formula, NO, and then you put a big digit in front to say how many of that molecule you're talking about. Well, good. So here you see the chemical reaction that we just saw written out. N2 plus O2 turn into two molecules of NO. Okay, and again, to emphasize, the number of atoms did not change. There were two nitrogen atoms and two oxygen atoms that went into the reaction on the reactants, and there were two nitrogen atoms and two oxygen atoms in the products. Okay, well, now it's your turn for a drill. I will show you a different chemical reaction, and so just look at the chemical reaction that I'm about to show you, and then we'll see if you can write out the chemical reaction. But here, just looking at it, is the chemical reaction. Okay, there are the reactant molecules, and then they collide with each other. Old covalent bonds get broken, new covalent bonds form, and there are the products. Okay, let's practice writing out that chemical reaction. So if I were to say, what's the first thing you would write? How would you write out the reactants? Stop the video if you want to, but here's the answer. You would write out 2H2 plus O2, right? Because there are two molecules of H2 in the reactants, and there's also one molecule of O2 within the reactants. So 2H2 plus O2. And then how do we symbolize the molecules crashing into each other, old covalent bonds breaking, new covalent bonds forming? We symbolize that with the arrow, which we say turns into. So we say 2H2 plus O2 turns into. And then now we have the product molecule. So how do we write out the product molecules in the written chemical reaction? Well, in this case, we write 2H2O because there are two molecules of H2O present in the reactants. Okay, good. Hopefully you've got the hang of how to write out a chemical reaction. Now, notice what I've been saying, that the number of atoms doesn't change. In this chemical reaction, there were 4 hydrogen atoms and 2 oxygen atoms in the reactants, and so there must be 4 hydrogen atoms and 2 oxygen atoms in the products. So yeah, number of atoms does not change in a chemical reaction. But notice the number of molecules can. If I were to ask you how many molecules are there in the reactants of this, the answer is 3, right? There are 2 molecules of H2 and 1 molecule of O2, so there are 3 reactant molecules. How many product molecules are there? 2, right? There's two water molecules. And so the number of molecules went from 3 to 2. That's allowed in a chemical reaction. The number of atoms is what can't change. Okay, well, here's a different chemical reaction. This obviously has more molecules and bigger molecules. And so 1 molecule of C6H12O6 reacts with 6 molecules of O2, of oxygen, and those turn into 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water. So what is this chemical reaction? Well, it's actually a very common chemical reaction that goes on in the body. We will study it later on. If you're curious, it's called the cellular aerobic respiration reaction. And this big molecule right here, C6H12O6, is glucose. It's a type of sugar. And so, yeah, this reaction takes place all the time in all the cells of our body. And like I say, we'll study it later. I'm just using it in today's lecture as an example of a chemical reaction. So if I were to show you this and say, what are the reactant molecules? You would say, Mr. Edens, the reactant molecules are glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen. And if I were to say, what are the product molecules? It would say, Mr. Edens, the products are carbon dioxide and water molecules. And so that would be correct. And if I were to ask you, what's the total number of reactant molecules? You would say, Mr. Edens, there are 7, 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. And you would say, Mr. Edens, there are 12 product molecules, 6 molecules of CO2 and 6 molecules of water. And if I were to say, are the number of atoms changing? You would say, no, Mr. Edens, they are not. There are 6 carbon atoms on the reactant side and 6 carbon atoms on the product side and 12 hydrogen atoms on the reactant side and 12 hydrogen atoms on the product side and 18 oxygen atoms on the reactant side and 18 oxygen atoms total on the product side. So yeah, number of molecules can change, but the number of atoms never changes in a chemical reaction. Very good. All right. So this is just one of the chemical reactions that goes on inside the cells of our body. Each and every cell in your body has actually thousands of different chemical reactions going on. Here you see a close-up of some of these reactions going on inside your cells. There's a molecule called L-xylulose that changes into a different molecule called L-xylulose. And I have no idea what any of these molecules actually do inside our cells, but here's one called 3-oxogluconate molecule, and it can undergo a chemical reaction to change also into L-xylulose. And L-xylulose can change to L-xylulose 5-phosphate. Anyway, in each and every cell of your body, there are thousands and thousands of chemical reactions going on all the time. It's just like each and every cell is this crazy chemical factory with thousands and thousands of chemical reactions going on 24/7. And that's just in every cell in your body. Your body is made out of trillions of cells, so there's just an enormous number of chemical reactions going on in your body all the time, 24/7. And the term for all of those chemical reactions together is metabolism. So the term metabolism means all the chemical reactions that are going on inside the body. That is your metabolism. Okay, well, that is the end of this introduction to chemistry lecture. As usual, I highly recommend that as soon as you finish each lecture, you go to the online review questions and try to answer all the online review questions, preferably not referring to your notes, to see if you've understood and memorized all the concepts. Try to answer those review questions just from pure memory. Okay, thank you very much. I will see you in the next lecture.